Hey, welcome back to the Papers Podcast, where we review all of the health professions education literature and enhance your practice. I got the usual crowd here. We're a little bit punchy today because Lara is having extraordinary difficulty with technology today. On top of her usual, she's got a new mic. She's all fancy about it, but she doesn't know how to drive the buttons. That's okay. It's all right. Welcome back, Linda.
Hello there.
Welcome back, John. Actually, John's back in John's head.
Hello there. Dear listener, I'm trying a new move. I do the behind the move and I spin around in my chair for added drama. The video version of this is way better than I think the audio version will be.
The audio version.
I think that's going to be the name of our biography, added drama.
Lord help us all.
All right, Lara. Speaking of Lord help us all, Lara has a paper today, and it's different. And Lara's got a new mic, and we've been coaching her this whole episode. All right, Lara, take it away.
This whole episode, all like 5 seconds of it thus far.
Okay, maybe not this episode, this recording session. That was a short form for recording session. It's okay.
Oh, hi, everybody, and thank you so much for listening in today. I picked a paper for us that I hope is going to start a conversation that may not be part of the normal conversations we're having at medical schools right now. One of the hardest things I've ever done, and I'm sure this is going to resonate with many of you, one of the hardest things I've ever done was become a parent. I was not at all sure that I would be a good parent. Quite frankly, I was really worried that I was going to be terrible because, like, what are the qualifications, right? You need time. Well, I have none of that, never have, probably never will. You need money. Well, when we decided to have children, my husband and I had really nothing between us except maybe some student loan debts. And, what else you need? You need love. Well, this might, in retrospect, it's stupid. But at the time when I had my kids, before I had children, I was really worried that I wouldn't be able to love them as much as I loved my husband because I was so happy. And I thought, there's no way I can love anybody more than this. So, I'm come to realize that that's ridiculous. It multiplies. It's not divided. And there's no good time to have kids, right? You have them when you have them. Sometimes you can plan that. Sometimes you can't. But my point here is that becoming a parent is like jumping off a cliff with no idea what's at the bottom. And you have no idea if there is a bottom. And there's nothing that can prepare you for what awaits. And as this paper we're going to talk about today suggests, more and more medical students are either coming to medical school as parents or are becoming parents in medical school. Talk about a leap where, in addition to the medical school work demands and the concentration requirements and the time demands, you're going to add into that becoming a parent. So maybe once upon a time, in an era long behind us, parenting in medical school may not have been as big a problem or a big a concern as we see it now. Once upon a time, when medical school was dominated by male matriculants, then having family meant that there was somebody else at home carrying the parenting load. So surely it was still a leap, but it was a different kind of leap. There was infrastructure there. But that era is long gone. Parenting is a completely different phenomena today. More and more today, parenting is more equally divided between parents. And women aren't staying home to parent. They're part of the workforce. And we're more mobile than we were before too. So you may not have grandparents and aunts and uncles and cousins who can lend a hand. So parenting during medical school is a phenomenon that's really different today than it was, say, 30 or 40 years ago. But problematically, we haven't adjusted our thinking yet. We haven't adjusted our thinking about what parenting as a medical student means. What help do those parents need? Are we providing it at all, or are we kind of ignoring them? So this is the topic of this paper today. And I want to ask some of you some questions. Jason, I think you were a parent during medical school, right? What was that experience like for you?
Oh, how much time do you have?
Right?
In a word, it was really difficult. Let me just tell you first an anecdote. You were talking about sort of the history of the generation ahead of us. Before them, I think I read this, correct me, listeners, the term resident comes from when Hopkins founded postgraduate medical education and people were resident in the building. Like if you lived in the building, they discouraged marriage and having children because they felt that the trainees should be present at all times.
In fact, they had to ask. The residents had to ask permission to get married. They might have been given a Sunday off to do so, or maybe not.
Or to have children. So we've come a long way if that's our baseline. when I was a medical student and my wife was a medical student, we were in the same class. And when I met my wife, she was a single mom of 2. And I had instant stepkids. And it was really tricky for all the reasons that you mentioned there, because we were juggling finances. We were both learners. Our schedule was not our own. We needed support. We needed resources. We had some amazing people who were, including the undergraduate dean, who helped us get through and have the careers that we have today.
Thanks for sharing that, Jason. Appreciate it. John, you became a parent after medical school, I think, right? So can you look at that crystal ball of life and think about what it would have been like to be a medical student in that parenting moment of those first few years? Ugh.
I've tried to erase all memory of my child's earliest years because they were full of diapers and sleep, eggs, deprivation, etc. I would say, if I was going to look across the spectrum, there is at least an awareness now, but not great resources, whether you're, as we're going to discover, whether you're a medical student or a resident or even a staff physician. And I also understand that I speak from the position of being a man, which does not have the same challenges as women in the health sciences. And so I want to be cautious that I'm not trying to speak too broadly, but I'm also recognizing that you can compound the challenges there. But I think health sciences, at least in medicine, I can't speak for nursing or rehab sciences or others, there's a growing awareness as it's part of the whole wellness conversation, but it doesn't get any easier in residency, and it doesn't get any easier being a staff physician. The fiscal resources available to you as a physician with a salary obviously makes it a lot, gives you some additional tools to bring to the problem than it does a medical student. But I'll tell you, managing the challenges of a profession that wants all of you, and until recently, that conversation of what was an appropriate boundary or limit, that can be challenging at any extreme. And so it's kind of a comparison of who broke their leg the worst. The challenges of being a parent wherever you are, it's kind of a non-response.
Linda, you've mentored so many medical students and residents and members of our community. You've probably seen a whole range of experiences. Maybe you could offer some reflections on what you've seen different. Maybe some people handle it better than others. I don't know.
Well, I think so. I think mentoring is important. I will say when I was in med school, less than 10% of the students in my class were women. And the expectation was that we would be one of the boys. And that included, devoting all our time to non-parenting activities, which the few boys in the class who were married did as well. The best mentors that I've seen, I think of some of my sister clinician educators, and I've watched them mentor more junior clinician educators and other learners and they do a fantastic job because they've been through it. And I think that's something that's really, really helpful. On the other hand, I have 2 colleagues who've had multiple kids. So I think 5 in one case, 7 in one case. Your eyes are big. I see that, Lara. And one of them ran an ICU, but had a spouse at home. The other one came from a 2-physician family, but they had a nanny and a cook. That's very helpful when you're a staff person. It's not very helpful when you're a poor starving student with a loan.
Yeah,
there's no simple answers.
No, there are no simple answers. And one of the lines that when I first had my first child, and I was working at the University of Ottawa up in Canada, and there was one of my mentors, one of my colleagues up in the space, sat me down shortly before my first son was born, my first child. And she said, now, there's a lot of things you need to remember, but the first one you need to remember is that sleep deprivation is a form of torture. And I was like, hot damn, she's right. And I didn't really understand what she meant until like month 3 of sleeping maybe 2 hours a day. It was, right? It's just the sheer volume of pieces of that experience that can impact you is unbelievable, which is part of the reason I picked this paper today. The paper I selected is by Mulholland and Gulliver. It's called Support of Parenting in Undergraduate Medical Education Training in New Zealand, and it's in Medical Teacher. The This paper aims to capture the student and coalface staff perspectives in determining what medical schools may need to do to support all student parents to complete their degrees. So this paper has data that comes from 3 different pieces, right? So first, so there are 2 medical schools in New Zealand, and together they have a collaborative longitudinal study running involving medical schools and graduates called Medical Students Outcome Data and Longitudinal Tracking Project. So they call it MSOD for short. And MSOD collects data at entry to medical school, at graduation from medical school, and then at graduate training years 1, 3, 5, and 8. And this survey captures a whole variety of demographic data, including information about medical students as parents, if they were parents before starting, if they became parents during school. So these data were analyzed against other trends within the data set that could perhaps indirectly indicate if the current supports provided to medical students were effective, such as time taken to complete degree. All right, so that's data set 1. Number 2, they intentionally then recruited staff and students who had been parents for another survey that was specifically about the needs of medical student parents. How were those needs being met? How accessible were those supports? The third piece of data is that the authors did a scoping review of all the supports that were available to those medical students. And they sought out information via 2 different pathways. So one is what they called known pathways. So things like the student affairs office, places where the faculty was hoping these new medical student parents would come, or medical student parents who aren't necessarily new. And then they also had collected data via the internet. So they searched on the internet, like many medical students would probably do if they didn't know what was available. So they brought these 3 data sets together to provide some insight. Let's get some comments on these methods from you all. Let's go, John, Linda, Jason.
My first thing, it's going to be a bit of a negative tone. It's going to persist for my methods, is there are so many acronyms in the run up to the methods section. I was like, I'm not sure if we're still in English anymore. I don't recognize the words here. I'm going to quibble a little bit, which is the first part I have is I'm not sure why they did a survey.
Same. Yeah.
And so they went to a single center. They didn't do both of their centers. Why didn't they survey both sites? Then they have a survey of 33 individuals in total, kind of a mix of staff and students. And then the survey is open response type format, which people get very tired of typing very quickly in these types of things. And so if you want to get rich data, then a focus group or an interview is going to give you better data. If you want to get like generalizable data, then you need a bigger sample. You can't have 33 people writing open text because you're just not going to get the type of data that you really want. Is it generalizable? Maybe. I don't know, because I don't have any understanding what the denominator is. Like there's no description of what the denominator could be. And then they do kind of a mini faux pas about they ask them, how would you rate the quality? And they have an agreement response with that. And that's a kind of a bit of a faux pas, because whenever you say, I strongly agree or strongly disagree, what people usually will do, they'll start to acquiesce to the question rather than thinking through what it is. You want to give anchors that say, I align more with this question or statement rather than I agree. And so agreement response anchors are kind of a bit of a faux pas in a survey. So I don't like that. And then I'm not sure if I would call what they did around the scoping review a scoping review. I think it's an environmental scan, but they don't tell us what they did, except
no,
we
they
looked
don't
around.
at all. That's my quibble.
Next sentence. And so I'm thinking, I see what they have, an important topic. They have access to a historical database, which is, here's why we're going to do it. And then they have this historical database, which will tell us a little bit about parenting stuff. But then the actual stuff where they get new data, it's a bit of a non sequitur. I can't make heads or tails of what they're doing in the methods section there.
Yeah, the only thing I'll add to that is the lack of information about what they call a scoping review, but I suspect, like John, it doesn't. And also the fact that it doesn't really align well. I mean, when you look at a paper, you'd like to see something maybe addressed in in the intro, in the methods, and then in the results. And I finally did find what I think were the results for the scoping review, but it wasn't headed by something that said scoping review. So it took me a little bit of time for that. I agree with you, John. It probably was some sort of environmental scan or document review done sort of by Googling things, or who knows.
Well, I'll follow on in the same vein. So first of all, when I started reading this paper, I thought, okay, this is a case study of one school and their approach to this phenomenon of students who are parents. And then here's all the different sources of information they got. But it really isn't. It's actually a survey study with a bunch of accessories, and it really was hard to follow. So it's a very earnest paper, and it's an important topic. But I felt like the editors were missing in action on this one. They could have influenced this paper to make it more accessible and a little bit cleaner.
So in a small reflection from my part on the methods, I didn't have as big a problem with the methods as you guys may have. One of the things though that I really would have loved to have seen, I was fine with the first set of the data, using the large multi-institution longitudinal data as part one of the data set. I thought that was totally fine, works for me. What I would have loved to have seen was in that second part, as y'all have suggested, instead of surveying the students and the faculty members, having even short interviews, 20-minute, 30-minute interviews, probably would have given you really useful insights that would have been would have provided a more rounded argument, a more rounded insight. And the scoping review,
they probably couldn't. These parents are really, really busy. They probably couldn't get them
right, and maybe that's part of it. Yeah, maybe that's part of how hard it is.
It gives you worse data on surveys. It means some people don't. Your response rate's lower if you have a really busy population. But getting 5 of them and interviewing them will give you really rich data, which might actually change your outcomes and change policy. So I thought that was missing.
Maybe you change the format. Maybe instead of it being sit down in this room and we're going to do the interview, maybe the interviewer goes to meet them and takes the kids for a walk, or goes to the park, or and buys the coffee, something like that, right? This is when we have to get creative.
Buy ice cream.
My God, I would do every focus group that came with free babysitting. I'd be like, what do you want to know about? I have no experience in it, but I'm in free babysitting.
But actually, there's a whole branch of research, or a whole branch in the methods related research world about enabling a greater accessibility for participants. And part of it, often they talk about making it physically accessible or auditory and those sorts of, but part of it is also this very language around if you're interviewing parents about being a parent, then recognize they have kids, and how are you going to make this such that you interview on their terms, not on yours? So just a interesting piece. So then moving on to results and discussion. In terms of results, the large longitudinal survey found that a small but consistent number of medical student parents are enrolled as parents or are becoming parents after matriculation into medical school. And importantly, the data show that both male and female students are having this parenting experience. So this is not a female student problem. This is an all student phenomenon. And the data suggests that medical student parents are taking longer to complete their degree. And when we look at the surveys sent to the medical students and the faculty, we get some interesting but probably not surprising data. 67% of the medical student parents who were part of the study said that there was no support, or that they lacked knowledge of available support. How did students find out about support for them? Well, the survey says through word of mouth. 44% of the students said that was the only way they learned of any medical school support available to them. And this is interesting when we contrast it with what the faculty said, because 47% of the faculty thought students found out about available supports through official channels. Which is then more interesting, because as you go down through this paper, you'll soon find out that through that scoping review they did, is that it wasn't until 2017 that there were any formal policies or written documentation about these formal routes. So you have to ask yourself, how could faculty think that they went through formal routes when there wasn't a policy provided for that? The next point just really makes me cringe. Student parents and the faculty scored the available supports, right? So out of 5, they gave the available supports rankings on 3 different topics. So the first one, out of 5, effectiveness of the support, students gave effectiveness a score of 3 and the faculty gave it a 4 out of 5. For organization, the students said 2, and the faculty said 4. And then when they ranked attitude of these supports, students said 2 out of 5, and the faculty, wait for it, 4.5 out of 5. And here's evidence of the age-old truth that if you want to know how good your intervention is, don't ask the people who built it. Ask the people who are using it. Students are saying the support offered is not effective, it's not well organized, and the attitude is poor. The faculty simply aren't aware. And the data also offered areas of improvements. And I won't go through all of them, but there was a lot. It was wide-ranging from greater flexibility in timetabling and adopting clear policies to offering options for part-time studies and increasing parental leave allowances. The one thing, though, that I do want to highlight is that, as I said, in 2017, there was no formal policy written or documentation that was specifically written to address these students. But in 2019, in response to early data from this study, tip of the hat to the institution and tip of the hat to the researchers for saying, you all have to know about this data and we have to do something, because in 2019, that they started to change that and started writing up these policies and documents. Now, I have all kinds of things I want to say about this, but I'm going to give the microphone over to Linda and then Jason and then John.
I think really the only thing I want to say is this doesn't surprise me. You know, there ain't much support. What support there is, the users don't know about. And as you said, the makers of the support aren't aware of that. So it's probably, to fix this, a multifaceted approach of communications and other types of support, maybe highlighting people who have children or who are going to have children to the support bodies, whether it be an assistant dean or whoever.
So, Lara, you went quickly over some of the demographic data where they showed it was a very small percentage. I think it peaked out at 4% or something like that in this study over a decade. In North America, it's much higher because our learners are older. So there's an even higher percentage of people who are parents during training. So I think that, around the world, it's really variable about the support and the flexibility. I find universities very rigid with respect to trainees and having flexible academic programming. But I find faculties of medicine a bit more flexible. I don't know about faculties of nursing or other people's experience in health professions. I think you need to emphasize Table 3. All those interventions, all those cool supports that were identified, I think are hugely valuable for readers. Table 3 lists all the specific parent-specific support and then sort of generic support for learners to get through a medical program. I think that's a very valuable table for those who are leaders in health professions education. That's a good place to start.
I was surprised with the tenor of your description of the results. Like, there is something there, because I was like, meh. 44% of students. Well, that's 8 students out of a cohort of 300. Or the lack of any kind of statistical analysis of the difference in these agreement type responses of 3 on a scale of 5 versus 4 on a scale of 5. I'm going to eyeball that when I see what the actual N is and probably say there's no difference there. But your point, I think, is this is a problem. The data here gives us the what. And all of us, I don't think, need to be convinced of a what, that this is an actual need. I would want to know the why. Like, what is it like to be a woman who is a parent? And why is that different than to be a man and a parent? And what are the nuances there? Because that's a richer kind of thing to know. Or when you said you only found out through other students about the supports available to you, what are the institutional barriers? What's happening there? Why did the institution not be proactive? And I think that's oh man, I wish I could have seen that part of the paper, because that makes me want to read past all the acronyms to get to that point.
There's maybe one of the barriers until recently relates to leadership and gender of people in leadership positions. We know that women were not well represented in leadership positions in medicine and in academic medicine in particular until fairly recently. However, they probably were, if anywhere, better represented in the education side of it, in terms of being an assistant dean or somebody like that. But even so, if the leaders aren't there who get it, it's very hard for the students to be gotten.
Right. Yeah. What I want to emphasize coming out of this study is that I think this study is emblematic. I suspect that if you conducted this same study at pretty much any medical school, you'd have similar results. Medical student parents need help, and we're not providing it. I would love to challenge our listeners to look for medical student parent supports at your institution. Do you know what they are? Do the parents in your context rely on word of mouth too? I'm going to put forth that we should not be ignoring this population. As Jason pointed out, it's bigger in some other areas and it's growing. And it's not just a mom problem. Can we make that really clear? Medical students of all genders, of all gender identifications are increasingly becoming parents, and we need to help them. Let's not make these learners take a leap off a cliff that's even higher because we let it be and we didn't support them or even provide a flashlight to look down the cliff, right? It's hard enough to be a parent. We don't need to make that challenge even harder. And so with that, I will now move to our voting because it's what y'all are expecting me to do. Let's say methods out of 1 to 5. Please feel free to vote in emojis. Let's
Larry,
go, Linda,
you
Jason,
just went
John.
through a whole bunch of 1 to 5s from this paper.
Yeah,
You're
but that's their
excitedly.
data. I respect their data.
This is our data.
It's just randomness. No, it's not. Linda, Jason,
I
John.
know, seems inconsistent.
I'm going to give this a 2 for a couple of reasons. One is I don't really see a scoping review that's a scoping review. That may just be a name thing. 2, I think we need some qualitative data. In terms of the actual what they did do, it's all right. But I'm not sure it's going to answer the question as well as they would have wanted to.
Jason.
I'm going to give this a 2 as well. It's an important topic. It would have been a groundbreaking paper if they did the focus groups that we all talked about or interviews. Let's get some rich data on that experience and what was needed, what the gaps are. Let's understand it better. This paper, the value is in table 3, the list of interventions, but it's just the beginning.
And John.
You've heard my concerns with the methods. I went on it at depth, and I don't want to beat a dead horse any further. So it's a 2 for me.
So I'm going to give the methods a 3, and in part because I want to make sure I highlight this note from the contributors. So the second author, Linda Gulliver, Linda supervised the first author over the course of her summer studentship for this study. So this is a summer studentship paper. So I'm really impressed with that. And then I also want to point out that Mulholland is a mother of 2 and a practicing clinician. She's also enrolled as a barrister and solicitor and has formally completed a biomedical sciences bachelor's. Like, if this is your summer project, I'm like, dude, tip of that.
Not the quadruple threat, they are the quintuple.
Like, seriously, right? So then, in terms of impact, how would you rank it? Let's go, John, Jason, Linda.
I want to do a little bit of a preamble here, which is say I think the topic's important. The title is where we find that. It's a great title, but I think they committed a couple of cardinal sins for me. In their results section in the abstract, they make a statement which I'm not sure is actually supported by any data, and you got to be careful about that because I think it then devalues what's happening. In their table 3, they list a lot of supports available for parents. There's a lot of stuff there, but in their results section, they say students don't know where to find it and they actually don't feel supported. So there's a mismatch in that data. And so I think somebody who is not convinced, and I know all 4 of us are convinced, and I think a large section of our audience, particularly the parents who are in health sciences, would be convinced of this is an important topic to consider. But for the person who took a contrarian stance, I think this paper and the way they presented their data and made some of their statements would actually, there could be a room to say, oh, this is not a problem. See how there's all this internal conflict within the way the results are presented. And so for the educational impact for me, I guess it's a 2. The results, I want to say a 1, but because I think the call to arms in the title is really important, it balances out to a 2 for me.
Ditto.
I think I'd say the same thing. I would love it to be more. But if I take my emotions out of it, the impact is a 2. Pull the table 3 out of it, it's worthwhile. But I'd also like to see something in here about how to do some of these things to publicize it more, to implement them better, to make them more effective, as opposed to just having a list of potential interventions.
Sure. So I'm going to give this paper a 4 because it's a first pass. Yeah, it's a first past the post paper. It is one of we have done that before. When there is a paper that may not necessarily have the greatest insights or any of that stuff, but they are one of the first passes. John, I see your face.
It was my idea of the first past the post.
Yeah,
I'm okay.
And I didn't like it then, but I'm totally stealing it now because it serves my purposes. But I think it's a first past the post paper that then says that is creating that this is the start of the discussion. This is the start of the evidence that needs to be developed to say we have something we have to contend with here. So for that reason, I'm going to score it higher than you all. And with that, dear listeners, we want to thank you for tuning in for yet another episode of the Papers Podcast. We would love to hear from you, and you can reach us at thepaperspodcast@gmail.com. And in case that's just a bridge too far and you just want to scope around the internet, look up Papers Podcast and you'll find us there. Thanks so much to our Karolinska Institutet partners who are making all of this so much easier for y'all to find us. And so with that, we hope that you've enjoyed our conversation today and that we've given you something, if not to think about, maybe even to chat about with a colleague. So until next time, I'll say talk to you later.
Bye-bye.
Thanks for listening.
You've been listening to the Papers Podcast. We hope we made you just slightly smarter. The podcast is a production of the Unit for Teaching and Learning at the Karolinska Institutet. The executive producer today was my friend Teresa Sörö. The technical producer today was Samuel Lundberg. You can learn more about the Papers Podcast and contact us at www.thepaperspodcast.com. Thank you for listening, everybody, and thank you for all you do. Take care.